All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here and attending this session. Really looking forward to today's session. Obviously, we have a small group, so please encourage everyone to feel free to ask questions, interrupt us. We'd love to make this as interactive as possible and make sure that everyone gets the most out of this session. So please encourage the questions. So in today's session, we're going to be discussing Zero Trust architecture and Secure Service Edge, or SSE, in a multi-cloud world. I'm joined today by John Graham, CISO for NetJets, and also Michael Strauss, Director of Security Architecture for International Flavors and Fragrances.
There you go.
All right, that was a lot to keep to get out. So gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, start with some introductions, maybe John?
Absolutely. So I've been with NetJets a couple of years now. I'm not new to Zscaler. I actually started working with these guys back in 2014 at another company, and I brought them into two other companies prior to that. And I'm one of the old guys. I've been in cyber since the 90s, believe it or not. So it's a lot of things have changed over the years. So looking forward to discussing it.
Thank you.
Mike Strauss. I joined IFF December of 2020, so I'll be rounding out the 2 years at the end of this year. I spent the majority of my career coming up through traditional infrastructure, security engineering, and then obviously landed IFF. To transition InfoSec at that organization, we actually did a merger with a division of DuPont in February, so brought in to help do that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael and John. My name is Brian Green. I'll moderate this session today. My role at Zscaler is CISO for the Americas, working with our customers, helping digital transformations, helping customers pivot. Oh, that was a party foul right there. Helping our customers pivot to Zero Trust. I come also from a security engineering architecture background. I've spent 24 years being a practitioner. I most recently moved over to Zscaler. I was the BISO, Business Information and Security Officer at Salesforce. So as part of that role, I led our transformation to Zero Trust, and ultimately we selected Zscaler as our partner. So got to know the executive team and leadership team here at Zscaler and decided to move over. So obviously super excited about the product and the platform and capabilities. So a little bit about today's session. So we're going to be speaking about digital transformation and how that is complicated by things like application sprawl, shadow IT, bring your own devices, an increasingly mobile workforce, and more and more multi-cloud workloads. So how users are deploying and shipping applications in public cloud, how they're selecting cloud providers, and so on and so forth. In the discussion today, we're going to really try to answer the question of how does Zero Trust and SSE mitigate risk across multi-cloud environments, and have some discussion about that as a collective. So John, I'll open this up maybe to you. What is your company strategy at NetJets with respect to multi-cloud?
Yeah, so right now we actually are only using AWS. The group prior to me joining 2 years ago was focused on the traditional lift and shift, and then they started using a lot of the AWS infrastructure that was there, infrastructure services that were there, and building on top of that. It's been interesting to kind of get in there and see what the teams were doing, and we're on now our second CIO that is giving them some new direction as of May, which is also interesting. But what we saw them do, and you've probably seen it in your own orgs, is the lift and shift truly is a lift and shift, and it's problematic because they don't actually organize anything for the cloud. They just pick it up and say, okay, moving it. And then the other thing we see is the whole thing about pets versus cattle. A lot of these things that we've seen created that we're starting to learn more about has been created like pets instead of standards and builds and all of that. So we're having to kind of break all of that down.
Yep. Perfect. And pets versus cattle is interesting. Just maybe go a little bit deeper into that for those of us that aren't familiar with pets versus cattle.
Well, if you've been around in IT for 20, 30 years, you've seen people used to build servers and put them under their desk, right? I mean, that's how the world worked. And then we built data centers, and everybody used to move to that. And then we built server farms. And unfortunately, what I've seen occur in many different companies, this one's the same, is that happened in the cloud as well. So one example is the WAF infrastructure that we have in AWS. It's not managed centrally today. So each team that stands something up builds their own policy sets today. And we're going to be correcting all of that. But all of that has to be reworked, and it's the pet versus cattle.
Yep.
So they're not following standards, they're not following guardrails, they're just building.
Sure. Yeah, I think another way to think about pets versus cattle is, your pet, right? You name your pet, you care for your pet, you love it, you're very protective over this server and this infrastructure you built. But in a cattle, right, when you get into public cloud, infrastructure is immutable. You spin it up, it performs a process, and then it burns down, and Terraform will, on demand spin up new infrastructure as well. So, interesting concept. Yeah. Michael, I'd love to hear your perspective on cloud, multi-cloud, how your company is looking at that.
Yeah, similar boat. I mean, we're definitely doing AWS first. We do have a little bit of Azure, but I think, even further than that, we have partners and vendors that are building things in other clouds that are dedicated to us. So obviously that's still going to have to, be secure, and we have to figure out how we're going to adopt those services. We're still going through our transformation period and growing in containerization, delivering apps publicly over the internet, as well as doing it internally. I like the comment I heard earlier this morning. How can we accept risk faster? That's certainly something that we're trying to adopt as we build things on. It's really about complexity. How do we take the complexity that we're seeing with shadow IT and organizations that are finding their own developers and doing things in AWS, and then coming to us and saying, hey, is this secure, right? How can we have an honest conversation and say, well, you should have came to us in the beginning before you started, and then be able to secure it going forward. So certainly putting those programs together, doing the simple stuff, right? Making sure we're checking the boxes and following the guardrails that we can set in place, and then building programs that are a little bit more adaptable to making that architecture work for everybody.
Perfect. Yeah. I'll double click a little bit further into what you said. You talked about some of your developers, some of your community within your company is building applications and services, but then maybe the security is an afterthought, or it's a secondary, right? They're coming to you for approval, and it's already built, right? So. What are some of the techniques? What are some of the processes? What are some of the maybe technologies that you're using to try to get in front of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a big one, and where Zscaler's been playing an important role, is just how do we get those developers in our environment, right? In some cases, they can't always just share our tools. Obviously, with containerization and using things like AWS, it makes it a little easier, but that's not always the case, right? And the traditional approach of, hey, we'll just ship you a laptop, right, doesn't always work for everybody. So we have a category of solutions that we try and work with to say, hey, will these work for everyone in a secure way? And if not, all right, let's kind of figure out and how we can pivot going forward. So having multiple solutions at our arsenal is definitely a key in being able to work with the different groups and the various stages that they come with us or come to us. But ultimately, we're trying to drive to a process where that doesn't happen, right? From conception to delivery. Obviously, we'd like to be part of that conversation ahead of time. And then building those guardrails up front, right? Saying, all right, well, if you're gonna have developers come in, I don't care where they are necessarily, right? These are the set of rules and criteria that they need to follow in order to go forward.
Yeah, guardrails. Yep, absolutely. I think getting those built into your SSDL or SDLC or whatever we're calling software development lifecycle these days. John, do you have a similar experience in terms of developer workloads and those sorts of things? How do you get in front of some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of us have to go through these journeys and maturity levels, right? And so one of the things we've been focusing on, the first journey was get Zscaler everywhere for the normal, right? The ZPA, ZIA, and all of that, which we've done. And then we started working on the developers around secure coding, which they'd never seen before. So we started introducing tool sets to help them and educate them on that. And then we added in a construct around digital certificate management and incorporated that into their pipeline so that we could do something. And now we're moving to the next phase with you guys on how do we do the workload management and the protection and all of that. So it's been a journey, but you have to do it that way, in my opinion, because the teams can't consume it if you throw so much at them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both of what you suggested are the appropriate means, right? Putting in the appropriate guardrails in place so that people have the tools and the capabilities and they know what they need to do, and then maybe having gating functions throughout the approval process, right? When they check in code or when they want to promote code from different environments and so on and so forth, so you can incorporate those into the pipeline.
Yeah, we're real careful about, I agree with you on the gating, but we're super careful about using that term and trying to ensure that whatever we do does not produce a slower product for them. So we try to collaborate as much as we can. Like Tenable, as an example, doesn't run in the stream, it actually runs below the stream, if you will. So they catch things the next round for the vulnerability scan. But you have to do things like that, otherwise they look at you like, oh, well, you're just slowing me down.
Right.
And it's not, it just creates too much consternation, so.
Okay, I'm curious, I'm gonna pull that thread a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So is there any point where there actually is a gate? So for example, like would you let them actually promote that code into production environment, or is there kind of like you can get through, stage and, testing or something like that?
We're hoping, right, that your posture assessment will allow us to do that. I mean, seriously, because yeah, we never want to be in that gate. We talk in terms of QA process, and we talk in terms of deficiency as a security element of their coding. So we don't try to talk about there's a security gate, you have to get security approval. None of that discussion happens. We all focus on you've got a process, you flow, you do your testing. Everything should be the same, and we should just be a component of that.
Right.
And we're trying our hardest to do that.
Sure.
Question on that, like, how do you handle division of labor when it comes to things like AppSec? So, I'm finding like most of the people on our information security team, they're not AppSec people. I'm the closest one to an AppSec guy because I'm in defense and software development and AppSec capacity.
Sure.
But like I've been out of the game now, I've been in the leadership thing for a while, and stagnant with where we're at. And we got developers that are trying to move fast, staying up on all this stuff, and it's like, you don't feel right coming in and being like, I'm going to be a roadblock, and by the way, I'm kind of an idiot on this stuff, so you're going to have to not only slow down because I want to put in a gate and get warm fuzzy, but also you kind of got to teach me, or teach guys like whoever I dedicate my. So are you hiring AppSec talent on your InfoSec team, or are you relying on champions in the development side that kind of dotted line roll up to you? Or
it's a fantastic question. So when we started doing, and it's a little off the Zscaler topic, but it's relevant, when we started talking to the development teams about secure coding and that we were going to put a tool in that they would use.
We did that too.
Yeah, we started talking about it, and we did it in a collaborative way. And the cool part for us, I had been there about 16 months at this point. The cool part to us is we had one of the lead developers that was really forward thinking. In his spare time, the guy was doing AI to try to figure out phishing on his own at home. And so he approached us and said, hey, I want to come over there and work for you. And we were like, of course. But at the same time, we have forced my team to go to AWS training. I mean, everybody, like even the network guys, I make them go to training. And so your point is extremely relevant, and I put it on my team to be able to be at the same level, or at least be able to know the terminology and understand. Because they can't help the other guys be performance oriented if they don't even know the terminology, know what they're doing,
Yeah, but I'm asking a lot of ones because so many different things you have to focus on. Resources hard to find.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the challenge. When I personally look at hiring and the way I build teams, it's all about passion. I don't really even care what they know when they come into the team, believe it or not. And I tell them, if they're passionate and they're learning on their own, it's like the developer we picked up that was doing the AI. He seriously was doing that on his own. And those guys, they'll eat it up. Anything you throw at them, they're going to eat it up. And I do weed those people out that aren't that way. I mean, intentionally. I had to, when I inherited the team, I moved into to NetJets. I inherited, 25, 30 people, and I probably turned over 5 to 15% of them, because I had a guy doing, what the hell was it called? Sorry, I'll lose it, but it was Moloch. All right, if y'all know anything about what's going on, but it's like a network sniffer. Yeah. He was focused on Moloch. Now we're in the cloud. We've been in the cloud as a company way before I got there, and this guy's looking at one path out of the data center. I'm like, you don't get it, And we finally had to work him all the way down to show us where you've caught anybody. I mean, he'd been there 10 years. I was like, show me where you've caught anybody. It was 0. We're like, you probably need to move on. But you got to, and it's hard. It's hard, right? Hiring is very difficult, but I truly only focus on the passion side. I mean, I'll hire a kid out of college if they're passionate and they talk about things they do in their spare time. I'm going to pick them up.
We fine-tuned
Yeah.
But go do this, and they can talk to me. What?
Does that have, you're not finding apps?
No.
No. You got to you got to find developers. Yeah. But you can't.
Well, that was the original question. I don't want to get too far.
Yeah. You can't go out and hire them though. I can tell you that right now. They're not out there. They're no available. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Way off on
this is a good conversation.
Tie back to the hybrid cloud question. You kind of touched on it with the training. Like,
Yeah.
that's been one of our biggest concerns. Like, if you migrated, you're looking at your team, you're looking at skill sets, you're looking where they come from. Like, nobody came from Azure shop, so I'll try to put this Azure stuff together, and then they're coming to security being like, "Is this secure?" Oh, shit, like,
Right.
maybe.
And you'll find out your teams are almost scared of it, which is what we had when I joined. Yeah.
The GUI's changed every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's where zero trust, that's why I'm like, well, maybe we can move to a philosophy where we just don't trust anybody and we're really focused on what assets are coming from and for the posture control and identity stuff. Maybe we can deal with a little couple more hiccups that we might have and how we figure a cloud environment. I think that's just
Yeah, you got to have, I mean, that's how I think about it. You got to have systemic controls that are supporting your guardrails. Otherwise, you're not going to catch any of it. You know, it moves to your point, moves too fast.
Layers of defense too, right?
Yeah. Note to self, Chris. Next year, AppSec, secure software development. We'll have a talk.
What did you guys say about AppSec earlier? You said something about your scanning was going to be able to detect SQL injection. I didn't catch some of it.
I was having trouble following.
Yeah.
Which one? What?
It was the one right before.
Oh, I don't know.
I think I couldn't hold it, and I went to the bathroom and came back, and I was like,
I don't know. I didn't hear that one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
within
workflow stuff, I'm not sure.
yeah within workload and within private applications. Yeah, OWASP top 10, those sorts of attacks. Yep.
I've seen that with API stuff too. I'm waiting for Zscaler to be like, yeah, we're going to start doing
APIs.
OWASP top 10.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gateway.
Yep. Yeah. So pivoting back to zero trust just a little bit. So within cloud, multi-cloud, even first party, we could even talk about how do you perceive zero trust and zero trust architectures ultimately solving, and what is their role in that?
Well, I mean, obviously it's a journey, right? And it starts with everybody going working from home and how they connect to certain areas. For me, I'm starting to use the zero trust architecture to also drive securing our R&D environment, manufacturing, right? Taking the same principles that we had, using that to leverage the IoT stuff that we're looking at. So once we follow that practice, right, and we're starting to come with a more robust process, I think that's where obviously we can leverage the tools even further. Obviously with some of the feature sets that you guys are bringing forward, that'll help us a lot as well, right? Give us that visibility that we're looking for, where we can then do different deployments, right? So today we only do it within trusted devices, right, for certain reasons. So where I can then go and start leveraging the zero trust architecture and Zscaler in particular, or in other areas, right? I can start handing it out to vendors and doing other things. So I think that's how we're kind of proliferating the atmosphere at that point.
Sure. John, any similar approach on your side, or?
Similar approach. I mean, we've got half the population in our organization runs on iPads and iPhones. So our crew and pilots all use that platform. So our first deal was just deploy to everybody. We're using Okta as an identity source. And then, from there, we are about 3 weeks away from pulling the trigger on having all the policy and segmentation. So we've been working with the Zscaler team to, data mine what people are doing and all of that. And so to be able to now extend that into the cloud is what we're after. That's the next piece. For us, the crown jewels are our customers' information. I mean, we've got information on the top tier people around the world down to, what kind of ice cube and what kind of bourbon do you want on your plane, so everything we have there is where we really focus, and our goal will be to segment that by who should see our owner information and who should not, and we're super close to that. So
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. How are you thinking about, so when you move from first party data centers and you move applications to either public or private cloud, how are you thinking about the security controls that you do there? So both of you are heavy AWS. So I'd imagine from a people perspective, you have a lot of AWS security, competency and those sorts of things. But how are you thinking about things like common controls, right? Are you going to diversify workloads into GCP or Azure? And then if you do so, then how do you do that maybe from a people perspective and also from a security controls perspective, right? The security controls, there's not always parity between the controls that are on AWS and GCP, for example. So how do you deal with, in an AWS only world, which it sounds like you're mostly there, that's maybe not such an issue, but as you're thinking more holistically or maybe even more strategically down the road, if you do expand to other clouds, how would you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, common tool sets if you can, right? So not leveraging, the things that just come with, an AWS or GCP, trying to use common tool sets that work within both. One of the things we're also trying to do when we containerize things and deliver apps externally is to really build them in a headless architecture. So it's really just the APIs that I'm concerned with at that point, right? The app doesn't have a place to phone home. It's just a bunch of API calls that is going to an API front end. So that's generally how I see things shifting, right? As we start to develop these apps to become more global, use internet and start to put compute closer to the edge. But yeah, and there does come a time where you got to shift differently, right? But depending on the different multi-clouds, it's kind of like coding, right? If you can do it in one environment, you pretty much can do it in another. There's always some little nuances. It's mostly on the infrastructure end, I find, some of those things happening. But you just have to learn it, and then where you can't use common tools.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking for the easy button too, is because you have to have some kind of standard, and right now we don't. I mean, we're not as educated as we need to be in the security team. Back to the earlier comment, we're trying to gain that, but the team's also looking at all the other tools that are out there for security, and we're trying to say, okay, well, let's figure out what we're going to do with Zscaler first, and then we can add, or if we have to. But today it's all wild, wild west. It's security groups, it's the built-in WAF, and none of that stuff's being controlled by my team. So we don't have any idea.
Right.
And I don't think we're very uncommon. I think that's common.
Yeah, I think that it is. I think because there was such an emphasis and such a strong push to move out, workloads to public cloud. Yeah, and you guys, I think, were a good example of that, right? You said that a lot of your infrastructure was just lifted and shifted over.
Yep.
So did those legacy security controls also get moved over? Probably for the most part, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Things like IP address restrictions and those sorts of things. So. How are you thinking about, this is a good example, in the previous talk in this room, I know some of you were in here, we talked about SolarWinds Orion and how workloads communicate. They were talking about how to mitigate threats into your workloads, into your server infrastructure. Mm-hmm. One of the examples Deepan mentioned was not allowing workloads to talk directly to the internet. So I'd be curious how you're approaching that. Are you using technologies like ZIA or a SWIG or some sort of a proxy to govern that traffic? Do you just have a hard block? How do you approach that?
You want to go first?
I'll go first. Mine's easy. We're not doing anything at the moment, but we also don't have a very big presence. What we have is a normal web presence that's landing page for marketing. We have what we call an owner's portal where somebody could log in and make reservations, and then we have a mobile app. Our goal right now on those two is honestly to try to get identity on our owner side and then pull them backwards into Zscaler, so that we actually use the same methodology we do today to protect those. That's the goal. But we don't have anything else that's actually internet facing, thank goodness.
Okay.
Just not in that industry.
Yeah, and for us, we use ZIA, right? That's our catch-all at all of our data centers outbound. We also protect things multi-layer through various firewalls, both east and west. Some of them are the cloud providers. Some of them are, ones we manage, right? So we have layers of control there for servers that need to talk to the internet. It's a tough one too, right? Because it goes back to that flexibility piece, where I think, I'd like to get to a place where, right, it's all locked down and, right, we use machine learning to start, doing variations thereof with either the ZIA policy as well as our firewalls that we have internally.
Yeah, and what we see across a lot of our customer base is, for their infrastructure, the non-public facing things, right? Just an internal application that's serving, finance or human resources or something like that. We see a lot of our customers putting that infrastructure behind something like a ZIA, so that if it were to, have some particular, callback to a C2 domain or some malware domain, that we would actually block and catch that.
Yeah.
But I think to your point is that's a journey, right? I mean, I think most of us are trying to secure our user base first, and then workloads and infrastructure second. Yeah. So you see a lot of news related to misconfiguration in cloud, right? Somebody misconfigures an S3 bucket or an EC2 instance, and they don't apply the appropriate controls or safeguards to it. How are you thinking about that in your environment? I know we touched on it just a little bit, but maybe a little deeper into things like orchestration or Terraform templates or other security controls that you may have in place.
Yeah, that's how we're doing, right? We're trying to automate that as much as possible. To go back into how we're securing the AppSec model is, let them, they're going to drive that configuration themselves. We just want to be a part of it, right? So we built into their CI/CD pipeline for all those pieces, and it can't move into production until they kind of prove to us through automation that it's going to be secure. And then just layers of defense from there, right? So monitoring, obviously, and then having prevention policies in place, so someone can't just take a server and put a public IP address to it and start allowing things outbound in AWS, right? We force everything through a tunnel from a workloads perspective. They don't really have the option to do anything different. And then again, if they need some sort of access, that's all automated, where they can go through the proper controls and make sure it's secure before it goes out.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're doing the same type thing. And the cool part is that that whole pets versus cattle conversation is the same conversation we've been having with the server team on how do you build a server in general and how do you build a laptop in general, right? It's the same concept, trying to build those repetitive templates and repetitive constructs.
Right.
Yep. We do, but it's new for the company. So it's new within the past 8 months, but we've been pushing it hard.
CIS marking guideline on a server, and then the next guy has
No.
to be the AppSec guy.
Yeah. No, I know.
Question there, John. Do you have any? We really struggle. We suck at this.
We did too.
And we're in constant negotiations with the SRE team trying
Yeah.
to figure out how you fix it. Because they're like, well, if we fire the image, then the Terraform scripts that spin up new capacity break. There's all kinds of reasons why we're getting stuck here. Is there any tooling or process?
I can't tell you we found the magic either. I can't tell you that. All I can tell you is we've tried though. We've tried to help from the side and to influence and not be in the middle of it, as much as we can. Because I've been in organizations before where it's like the security team is sitting there going through the CIS standards as an example and picking out all the things that won't run, but they're all accountable for doing it, and you just can't win that. So we've got the other teams involved in building the images, and we've been doing a whole lot of work around showing them why it's important for the stability of the whole company and having those discussions. So we want them to bring the tooling to say, here's how we can do it. We've been trying that approach so far. Yeah, all of it.
And for Windows, we've done GPOs, we've had intern projects. We go through.
Yeah, and you show it.
Yeah. I'll take the artifact with driven mess, run Carbon Black Cloud as our
Yeah,
software.
yeah.
And so I ended up with literally managing the list of
Exceptions.
cloud workloads that don't have Carbon Black Cloud.
Yeah.
And I pounded my fist on the table and yelled, and I got it down to 200 machines. And then they got them all done, and then the next week there's a different list of machines. That don't
Yeah.
have it. I'm like, what is going going on. That's job
Yeah.
security.
No.
You know, it's we as we dug into it, we found out it's these images.
Yeah.
You know, because a developer will say, "Oh, I need to go back and work on a project that I haven't worked on in 6 months."
Yeah.
They spin it up.
They're spinning new images and they don't have the agent on them.
Yeah. But that's where we need the posture
that's
stuff.
That's the workload. You can't deploy
Correct.
the machine without the agent,
Without.
and it should already be built into the workload. They really have no excuse,
Yeah.
right? And that's the conversation to have, right? Start building it in the workload,
Yeah.
and then you can
Yeah.
move forward.
Everybody agrees that there's no excuse.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, but every time.
Terraform made it easy
So-
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stop building it into the base image, build it into the Terraform process, and then you can't deploy a server without it. So you're going to be forced to work on it, right?
I mean, what's
that's
the repercussion when it happens, though? Are you guys turning them back off? I mean, you're turning them off right away?
I think.
He yells.
Yeah.
We do.
Because-
So we turn off
Yeah.
internet access.
Yeah.
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 And then, you know, I mean, there's some judgment that team has. So my team has access to just shut down
Shut 'em.
workloads.
Yeah.
And so we'll shoot it, and
Yeah.
you know, if there's problems that come out of it, I actually kind of celebrate those because
Yeah.
I'm waiting for somebody to get mad enough because we took an outage. That,
Yep.
you know,
Because I was going to say that's what we do that. I mean, we haven't moved that into the cloud place yet, but we do that for everything else. And it's crazy. I always laugh because we have CrowdStrike. We contain probably 15 to 20 laptops a day. And I keep looking at my team going, I don't know how this is sustainable. I look at the infrastructure guys, I'm like, what's going on? We don't have that many laptops. And it's funny, right? But that's what happens. They'll put one out there that's not encrypted. We'll whack it just like that, just immediately. And it's like, you know, we're going to do it all day. And it, to your point, for us either, nothing has escalated to the point where our executive team's like, why are you doing that? They're all supportive.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've even gone. We've had times when people will do stuff and then they repeat it after we've worked with them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, turn off their Active Directory.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just shut them down.
And everything. And even then, you know, you would expect, okay, well, there's no way they can even do their job, right?
Yeah.
You know, so somebody's going to raise their hand and go, Bob, what are you doing?
They have to, right?
No. You know, we had a conversation.
Yeah.
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 We got a private AWS cloud maybe.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, really good example of technical debt, and I think things we all struggle with, and I think just going back to Security 101, it's people, process, and technology, and I think we really struggle as an organization to get all those things firing on all cylinders. So final question. So in Jay's keynote earlier this morning, he talked about transformation, and he talked about transformation in the respect of that it's required for our survival, and there was a really good customer success story about how one of our customers used Zero Trust and SSE to really transform their business. So I was curious, how do you both view Zero Trust or SSE or any of the products and services we provide as a competitive advantage?
I mean, obviously, for us, right, both IT and security is to get out of the way of the business doing what they want to do, right? So I have been looking at the architecture around it specifically to allow the business to be more flexible, right? In specific the R&D space, they want to start leveraging the cloud more, right? It's 30-year-old traditional IT, a lot of technical debt that they're bringing to the table and then wanting to connect that to the cloud. So certainly for me, it's taking those kind of new ways of thinking and transformation around making sure that it's secure and allowing them to do what they need to do, and security is kind of seamless behind the scenes. So just trying to keep that in mind, right? And obviously the way the tools are becoming a little bit more flexible and give us that visibility, we can allow that sort of thing to happen. We can pivot a little quicker, but make sure that we're putting it in the right places.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
John, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same thing. The whole way we position any of the controls, especially what we did with Zscaler, is what's the value add, honestly. We don't talk about all the things that we gain from a security team, we talk about how do we get you connected easier. We talk about to the executive team that, hey, you can actually pull up Tableau now on your iPhone because you already have the ZPA or whatever connected back.
Right.
And they love it. I mean, we get emails all the time from people going, this is amazing, which is fantastic as a security professional. Normally you're all whacking people and they get frustrated with you. But by doing those things, we've gotten super response out of it.
Yeah, it's what we talked about in the hallway before, right? Not security being the department of no, but being the department of, to your point, how do you improve business agility? How do you improve, business outcomes? While you're also, from a security perspective, obviously we're concerned about the security outcomes and buying down security risk, but at the end of the day, the board is, obviously concerned about both of those things. So.
Yeah.
We've just got a few minutes left here. Any questions from the audience? We'd be happy to take maybe one or two questions if we have some time.
Which one?
Pets versus cattle.
Yeah.
You want to take it? I can take it.
I mean, it's like the Moloch example I gave you earlier. I mean, if you can't convince them, they've got to go. So there's a good book by John Connor where he talks about it's team performance and all this, but he identifies what's called a no-no. And if you find a no-no on your team, they're either passive-aggressive or they're outwardly speaking. But if they're not aligned to the vision or your business vision or whatever, they have to go. I mean, you just can't deal with it because they will constantly draw down what you're trying to accomplish. But you've got to have the people, and my head architect is here. He's fantastic. He was there. He's been there 16 years, way before me. But when I got there and started talking to him and we got him introduced to some of this stuff, he was like, oh, it's fantastic. I mean, he just gravitated and was passionate about it, so he drove his team towards it. But I've been in companies where that doesn't happen. And you fight and you battle always the infrastructure team and all the people that are holding on, and it's hard. I mean, you have to make them a believer somehow.
Yeah.
A lot of that to me goes to the executive team. Like for us, what we did as a business case before we actually purchased the first time was we showed them in a POC back to the fact that the data is the big key for us. We showed them in a POC that a red teamer could take 1,000 records at a time and nobody would even know it. And using Zscaler, we would pick it up with a DLP. And that's all it took. I mean, I showed the executive team and they were like, oh, okay. And so we sold them on that one component of the whole thing. And now what they have is, easy access. They have all this stuff that they didn't even think about before. And we didn't have to sell them on,
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on technical data cloud? Like you started your stories now around AWS. We built our backend libraries of SSO or whatever, stuff like that. Do you have any concerns or around, I don't know what we do about it. I don't know if it solves any of it. We're starting to see some of that stuff. Like, man, everybody's been on this cloud journey, trying to get stuff to the cloud, and it's like, man, what if AWS screws up?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's fair.
Screws up, and then what are you doing from a business perspective to be like, well, what's our disaster recovery plan if
Yeah.
AWS has a supply chain? One of their services.
Had a fascinating discussion with our executive team about that exact thing because our CEO, it was in the past year or more when Microsoft had an issue, if y'all remember that, and it was.
You're seeing after SolarWinds, you're seeing
Yeah.
weird,
Yeah.
like big bugs they've had or compromises. Because they got in or SolarWinds.
Yeah. But it was fascinating in the discussion because our CEO's, his experience level and what he was thinking in terms of was a traditional old school data center. And so we had to take him through the whole evolution of that's not how these things work today. They have a trailer full of servers that has, pipes and things. You just bring the whole trailer in and replace. I mean, it was like, well, there's no way we could do that as a company. Because that was one of the things he was like, well, do we just bring it back? I'm like, you can't and compete, right? So we've done more in terms of separate regions in AWS. We do a ton of testing, recovery testing, and all of that to try to gain their trust in it, right? I mean, because what else do you do? But the other thing you talked about, really goes back to the app security model, which is this whole notion of secure software build materials, right? You probably heard that discussed now, yeah. And I think that's going to be the only saving grace for any of us, because Log4j should have been a wake up for us, right? We were like, what the hell? So.
I've been looking at that and curious if this comes out back.
Yeah.
We're the largest distributor of infrastructure, waterworks, fire protection. So
Yep.
we're deemed essential during COVID, so I'm sure we're going to have to adhere to whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a good stick to go in and be like, that's cool.
Well, and your secure coding tool should help with that, right? That's what ours does.
But now it's like, what are all the packages that are involved?
That's right.
Now it's like the white sources, the black ducks, and the ones that
It's
they'll be like, oh, you're using all this open source stuff that is a dumpster.
it's going to be a mess.
Oh, by the way, all of our apps are dependent on this version of it. How
Yep.
to go about upgrading
Yeah.
old versions of Java.
Yeah. Education. Right, so you're starting to educate people, right? I have the same thing, not in the cloud necessarily, but on the manufacturing side. It's like, well, I can't update that, right? Because we haven't updated it in 30 years, and it's going to cost us tens of millions of dollars to do it. Like, I get that, but you need to make that investment going forward. All right, we're in the spot we're in now, right? We'll try and ring fence it and put mitigating controls around that.
Manufacturing side, that was by Siemens. Well, they were talking about
Yep.
their little device that they were like, yeah,
They can plop an appliance in
They
there
run app connector, and I was like,
Yeah.
to do remote access into
you
it.
can
Yeah.
make remote access by yeah. I said, that's pretty slick. Siemens has got basically a little box that you can deploy an app connector. CPA.
Yeah.
You can plot that in front of all your manufacturing stuff.
And then they can access it
If you
that
want
way.
access remotely, they can go through and just access to the one machine.
Proprietary. The other end, that's
I have no idea. Like, I think it's got.
Yeah.
There's
There's
30-second pitch, but I was like, I like.
The nice part about that is they're not just remoting into a piece of their infrastructure. Like they're not using it as a jump box. They're actually going to be able to remote into their manufacturing line, right? That is the beauty of it, because now they are directly connected to their manufacturing line using Zscaler. So I can, for us, right? We do lines of access into the actual production network, and actually IT doesn't manage it, right? There's people from the business that manage anything on that side of the fence. So to be able to give them an appliance that they can now go right into the manufacturing line, I don't have to give them a jump box to get to another layer, because that was, I inherited a bunch of manufacturing sites. They did that. Yeah, here. Well, what they would do is, they would just go get their own ISP and then plug it in, right? That's how they were doing it. Let's be honest, right?
what I've seen.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why do I have weird wireless here?
Yeah.
It's been there for years. You can't take it away. Or there's a vendor that's just plugged into the core of the production network. Yeah, you have all those too. Let's get rid of all of that, right? And part of it's education. We're just all evolving.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I think we're 5 minutes over, so I know there's other sessions that are happening. Happy to continue the dialogue, as Chris suggested. We could continue it out in the lounge or elsewhere. But again, thank you for all the questions. Appreciate it.